Good morning and good evening to those around the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Technical SEO for WordPress and Drupal Websites, What Developers Need to Know About SEO. Your speakers for today are Drew Gorton, Director of Agency and Community Outreach here at Pantheon, along with our guest speaker, Joost de Valk, CEO and founder of Joost. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we start. Please make sure you submit any questions you have during the presentation in the question window, or tweet them at @Pantheon. We will answer as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone next week. I'd now like to turn it over to Joost and Drew.
All right, thanks, Atusa. Yeah, so I'm Drew Gorton, as Atusa mentioned. I am the Director of Agency and Community Outreach here at Pantheon. Started my career as a web dev in the late 90s and thought I could do it better, so I started my own company. Went on to have all sorts of great clients and projects, and later on built a product along the way, and then that was bought by Pantheon, and I've been with Pantheon for about 2 years now. So here at Pantheon, I get to do two of my favorite things, which is work with agency partners and open source communities, cross-pollinate good ideas and best practices, and that's fantastic because I happen to think Pantheon is both of those things. So I'm really excited today, though, to be sharing Joost with you, with everyone here, about the topics of SEO and what developers need to know. So Joost, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm Joost. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Joost, and a father of 4 kids, and a husband to my wife Marika, who runs Joost alongside me, and to 2 other people. I've been doing loads of things, but I'm originally from the digital marketing space. I've been doing digital marketing consultancy for years before I started my own company. Now about 7 years ago, well, at some point I started building WordPress plugins, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
All right, very good. Well, let's look at what we're doing today. So we're going to start with just a little bit of background information. Again, I think it's always helpful to know who the people you're hearing from are and what sort of shapes their impressions and opinions and insights. And then we're going to dive in. We've got 4 major topics: information architecture and sitemaps, robots.txt, the relationship of JavaScript to SEO, and HTML elements. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions, as Atusa mentioned. So as you start thinking about things, as we mention stuff, go ahead and start making note of those, and you can start asking them at any time in the questions window. We'll be handling it, again, as Atusa mentioned, we'll be handling those at the end, but again, hope to have plenty of time to address everyone's questions. So let's get rolling. So again, just like big picture, SEO, there's kind of 3 stages to SEO. First thing that needs to happen is content needs to be found. And then content needs to be indexed. And then, of course, it needs to be quality. So it's not uncommon for developers or people building websites to think about SEO often as some sort of like dark arts, the realm of someone else. But really, the first 2 things are the responsibility of the teams of people building, planning, designing websites. You need to make sure the content is well suited to be found and well suited to be indexed. And that's what we're talking about today. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So, Joost, let's get moving. Tell us about your company and your background.
I founded Joost a while ago. Our mission is to allow everyone to build a findable website. And that could be any open source CMS. We've long focused on WordPress alone, but we try to do this as wide as possible to all other open source CMSs, and allow people to build a website that can compete with the biggest people in the world in terms of SEO, and have all the same tools that everyone else has. So as I said, I founded Joost about 7 years ago in 2010. We're now 55 people, 46 of whom are in the Netherlands, in a small town called Wijchen, where I am myself as well now. It's only about 40K people here in this town, but a lot of them work for Joost, luckily. Joost is now running on about, or Joost SEO is now running at about 7 million WordPress installs. We're also active in both Drupal and in Typo 3. Our Magento extension is coming soon. So we're trying to cover all those bases. Well, it seems to be popular in all of them. The only thing is that the numbers on all these other platforms are slightly less impressive because, well, WordPress is the big thing and all the other ones are slightly smaller.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I always think it's interesting to sort of hear about, so that's where you are today, but I think it's interesting to kind of hear the paths people take before they're being all successful and famous. So tell us a little bit about how you got to this spot.
Yeah, so I started out as a freelance digital marketer. When I started Joost, I was basically planning on not ever hiring anyone. That's how I set up my corporate structure as well. So I had to fix that later on. I was just doing that. I was consulting for some of the bigger brands in the world, for eBay, for Facebook, a couple of others. And I was building this plugin on the side just for fun because I thought, well, whatever I learn in all these big companies, I can put into WordPress and I can teach people how they can do that on their own sites. And then at some point in 2012, I hit over 1 million users for, at that time still called WordPress SEO. We rebranded it later to Yoast SEO. So I hit over 1 million users and I was still only doing that for fun. There was literally no profit in it. And my wife said, well, this is not really sustainable anymore. And she was probably right because I was answering emails about 40 hours a week. And because we have 4 kids, if I'm answering emails for my free plugin and I'm not making money, at some point that runs into like problematic. So we started thinking about how can we make a business model around this that supports me doing this better and more, and still allows us to give back and give to the community what we really want to. So we've been playing with that ever since. We have Yoast SEO, we have Yoast SEO Premium, which we sell. Yoast SEO itself is still free, and the largest majority of our users uses the free plugin, and we're fine with that. The paid users get some extra functionality, but basically, well, we tried to set up a business model in such a way that we could slowly grow that company into something bigger, and make that benefit the entire community. So that went well, except for the slowly part, because, well, from 2012 to now 2017, we've gone from having no employees to now having 55. So that's probably fairly quickly. And it basically all just happened to me. I know it feels stupid when people say that, but it's true.
You know, that's actually really interesting. Atusa, I think we should note this for a future webinar idea. I know a number of people, and there's a certain amount of resonance for myself personally on that as well. Like the thing that I was involved with was not, you know, 1 million installs, but it was several 100,000. And at some point you realize, wait, this is a huge asset, and also it's eating into my family life.
Yeah.
Is there a way is there a way we can adjust all of this and see what happens? But it's really interesting that, again, a lot of these things start as just kind of scratching, you know, it's open source, you scratch your own itch. And then...
Absolutely, yeah, it's scratching your own itch, and it's also having this, I really only started it because I wanted to do good, because that's why I open sourced it. I mean, I know that sounds very hippie, but that's the only reason I ever put it out there. I never had the intention for the first few years of making any money from it. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, well, it just blew up.
All right. Well, we'll save that for a later webinar. If anybody here would be interested in hearing such a thing, let us know. But let's go ahead and get into our content. So let's talk about IA and sitemaps.
Yeah.
So, take us away.
Well, you said it in your intro already. Developers and those planning websites, and I say that specifically not just the developer, but like the project managers and everyone related to that, are very required to think about all this stuff up front. So you have to think about, okay, what different types of pieces of content will be on there? What content will I put on this site? And is this going to be a 20-page website or a 200,000-page website? And you'll have to make a site structure that allows for everything to be findable in that site structure. Now, of course, you don't know all of this stuff up front, which is why you sometimes have to modify it later on. But site structure is really one of the most underestimated parts of SEO. If you change and update your site structure, you can really have a very, very deep impact on how well you rank just by pushing some internal links to specific pages that should be ranking better or are more important to you than others. So as you're planning websites, you should really okay, what's the site structure of this thing going to be? And then based on that, you should come up with, okay, so how are people going to navigate this? What's the menu going to look like? How do we allow people to click towards every page on that site? And that's slightly old-fashioned because people seem to think nowadays that just having a search function will fix everything. Well, that's not true, because for search it will, for SEO it will not. So we still need click paths to every piece of content on your site, and an HTML sitemap is a very cop-out way of making sure that there's a click path. So you should really have like a normal click path for normal users to get to any page on your site. And if you can't think of a way for a page for people to get to a specific page on your site, and you should really think about, okay, so if I can't find any other pages that I can easily link to this page, should this page at that point be there at all? So it is very tempting to start building a site without knowing all this stuff. I would really, really urge you to make sure that you do all of this stuff before you start building. Even when I know, having built sites for clients myself in the past, that it's not that easy. They often don't really know what they're asking for themselves, or they say that they need X, but they really need X, Y, and Z, but they're not telling you, or they don't have the budget. But try and make all of that fit into what you're doing. If you know, like, maybe they'll come up with something like this, then try and make sure that you have the room for that at some point. This is harder than it sounds. It's also easier because, well, you can change these things fairly easily. In the end, the point is that you should end up with a site structure that allows you to go from anywhere to everywhere, and that you'll find looks a lot like Wikipedia. I hope it'll look better than Wikipedia, but the internal link structure should be a lot like that. A lot of internal links like Wikipedia do really, really help in improving your site structure and in helping Google figure out what belongs where and what is related to what. So as you think about, and you've done your keyword research, or your client has done his keyword research, and he's thought about, okay, how do we structure this? Every page deeper should also really mean that you're going deeper into specific topics. Now, most of you will at some point inherit a site, and in that site, the site structure will not be good. We've recently seen some projects where we've helped people who had inherited a site like that. We've helped them clean up their site structure, and for one of them I get to show you the results, and these are the results of just changing the site structure. What you're looking at is the time on site change for between 2 months of just changing the internal structure of that site, not changing anything else, just adding more internal links, making it more obvious where you need to go from where to where. As you can see, these changes are ridiculous. This is literally the only thing that we've changed is the time on site, but we've gone from having people on site from 1 minute to having them on site for 4 or 5 minutes. And for most clients, this would mean a really, really big impact in how much money they make from clients, because if people are talking to you longer or looking at your site longer, you'll probably also sell them more. So one of the ways that you could do that, sorry, go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in with a question. So when you're talking about site structure and these internal links, there's, I think let's be really explicit. So are you talking about navigation structures? Are you talking about making edits to content to add, like, hey, this sentence should link to that other blog post? Are we talking about adding sidebar content to say, hey, you might also like, which of those things do you mean when you're talking about site structure?
All of the above.
All right.
All of the above. To be fair, and completely honest, I prefer links in content way more than anything else. So literally links in your main textual content within that, linking words to pages that explain those words.
And in the case that we're looking at here, can you give a, so again, knowing that you did all of the above, how much of your effort went into those, if you call those like 3 different categories? First category, rethinking navigation and navigation categories. Second category, in-page content linking. Third category, just sort of like ancillary content around the edges.
This was 2 things. This was in-content linking, and this was changing the main navigational structure. And to be fair, I think that changing the main nav menu here had the bigger impact. We actually shrunk it, so we made it smaller and more explicit, and made people take a few more steps to get. So you've got these gigantic menus these days. Those are a lot of people seem to be really big fans of making those gigantic drop-down menus, and these don't always work. So in this case, we tested with having a smaller menu and making people click a bit more. But as you can see, that led to a larger time on site because they were getting to their content a lot better, and their engagement with the content was also a lot higher.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a really awesome thing for everyone to take away. Like, certainly I've been doing web development since an age, and what people would say, like, everything should be 3 clicks from the home page, and there were some, a number of early quote unquote rules and guidelines, and some of us like these things are held on to, and you get to a site with 100,000 pieces of content, and or even just like 1,000 pieces of content, and it turns out if you attempt to do that, you sort of really quickly head to these mega menus and other things like that, and it's really important to remember that every single thing you put on a page distracts from everything else. So a focused navigation structure can really do a lot of good things for users, and I think that's one of the one of the things is like that Joost is really highlighting here is like make it findable, make it successful for users, and you'll see SEO go up as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is important here as well is that you might want to get them to that deepest page in your site because that's one of your better converting pages, or you think that page is very important. But they have to go through that natural progression of understanding why they need to be there as well. So it's very hard for most people to go into I need to be there specifically. They need to go through the process of figuring out where they need to be, and you need to help them through that process. You don't necessarily need to push them to that page straight away because they might even lack the context of why they need to be there at that point. So you need to think a lot more about user journeys. And as you think about user journeys more, you're also going to think about keyword research a lot better and about how you should structure your content better. And that all leads to better SEO.
Awesome.
So one of the things that we've done in Joost SEO, which I hope other platforms will absolutely follow in, that we have been starting to do internal linking suggestions as you type, where we give you suggestions on pages within the site to link to based on the content that you're writing about. Actually, I don't know, Drew, have you looked at Gutenberg already, the new editor that's coming out for WordPress?
Yes, yep.
One of the things that I really like about that is that we'll be able to do block level analysis. So every paragraph becomes a block, and we'll be able to say, hey, for this block, you should really link to X. And that's going to be very, very powerful in terms of helping people set up an internal link structure that works.
That's fantastic. For those who might not know, Gutenberg is the new editing experience, admin experience for WordPress. As to be the de facto standard sometime this year, TBD asterisk. But it is available right now as a plugin, and it's something that you can start playing with yourselves on your sites. If you're running a WordPress site right now, go ahead and grab the plugin and get a feel for it. If you are a plugin developer yourself, that's really, I mean, like, I hadn't thought about that application of it, but that's really powerful for what you're describing. So it allows you to interact with and just have a much richer experience in the kinds of in your plugin that you may be developing for others. And that is a really interesting use case.
It's very, because we can do a lot more stuff in context as people are writing and that's, I love being able to do that. It's just it's such a step forward for where WordPress is and what we can do with it. One of the things you see here in this screenshot is that we say link to these cornerstone articles, which is something that we allow you to mark in the plugin. And by saying that, we're saying, hey, this is one of the most important pages on your site. We actually have this concept of cornerstone content that we talk about a lot at Joost, where we say, okay, so you have like 1,000 pages on your site, but there's probably only like 5 or maybe 10 but a very limited group of pages that really describes the most important things on your site. So for us, for instance, our WordPress SEO article is one of our cornerstone content pieces. It's the piece that explains everything we think about SEO for WordPress. It's a very long thing. It's almost a book. We've been updating it every year for 8 years now. And that thing just is one of the things that we link to a lot. So as you mark something as cornerstone content, we tell you to link to it more. And one of the things that we're bringing in the next release actually is an overview of how many links every post has, and how many how many outbound links every post has, and how many inbound links that post has from other posts within your site. So soon, in the next version of Joost SEO 5.0, I hope to be released next Tuesday, you'll be able to filter by cornerstone articles and then by linked. You can just figure out, like, okay, which of my cornerstone articles should I link to more? This is all going to be in the free version of the plugin, so you should be able to play with that and have good fun optimizing your internal link structure.
Yeah, and it's worth noting too that this is obviously, there's nothing here that's so the plugin is a fantastic tool, really brings these things to the forefront. But if for some reason you didn't want to download the free plugin,
yes, well, there are some people who do not, Drew.
So,
I have a cool trick for that too. So let me, one of the things I tell people is, if you do a query in Google, you type in site : and then your domain name, and then space, and then the keyword that you want to rank for. That'll give you the results from your site for which page Google thinks is the most important for that keyword on your site. And it'll also tell you, because the #1 result is what Google thinks is the most important. If you've done your internal architecture well, that should be the page that you expect. But it'll also tell you which other pages Google thinks are relevant to that query. And then you can look at all those other pages and see whether you've linked all those pages to that page that should be the #1 for that term. And if you've not, you can just go in there and add links to that #1 page and really boost your internal link structure very easily.
that's a fantastic tip. Thank you.
So one of the other things that you can do if you thought about site structure is base your XML sitemaps for your site on that site structure. We try to do this on categories and post types in Joost SEO, but you can do that on several other ways if you do not use our plugin. But it's very important to make sure that you use a sitemap index, so you can have one XML sitemap index that points to individual sitemaps for specific pieces of your site. And if you have that, then you can go into Google Search Console and you can see for the specific pieces of your site what the errors are, what kind of feedback you're getting from Google within the sitemap section of Google Search Console. So it actually gives you a lot more data on how to work with that. It looks like this in Yoast SEO, but you can think of several ways of doing that if you don't want to use Yoast SEO. But because we do it like this, you can look into like, okay, so we have this custom post type for our ebooks, which means I can go into the Search Console page and look at the results of my ebook specifically and see if there's any errors there. Especially on larger sites, this is really helpful because if you have over 100,000 URLs on a site, having the option to go into sections of your site and see what's wrong with those sections actually helps a lot in figuring out what's wrong with your architecture and what's wrong with your site in general, because it'll also tell you all these crawl errors and all these other things that they're running into.
And Joost, sorry to interrupt you, but we're getting a couple of requests for you to repeat the tip for the Cornerstone Google search. People seem to be very interested in that.
So it's very easy, but let me repeat it slowly. It's you just put into Google site, and then without a space, directly your domain name, and then a space, and then the keyword that you want to rank for. And the #1 result should be the page that is the most important page on your site for that keyword. And the others are all the pages that Google thinks are relevant for that query. And if the #1 result is not the page that you were looking for to be #1, then you should really make sure that you fix your internal link structure and link all those pages to the page that you think is most important. And even if it is the #1 result, just checking like the top 20 and see if they're all linking back to that one page that you think should be ranking can really help you a lot in ranking. It's sometimes simple things like that that make all the difference.
Yeah, and actually, just to highlight, expand on that. So Google, so a lot of, we probably all use Google on a somewhat regular basis. There are a lot of, so if you ever go, take a moment and familiarize yourself with the advanced options in Google. And that's, like something like site : is just that's a very specific way of telling Google to look within a specific site. But another thing actually maybe I think that we should run through is the Search Console. So yes, you're very familiar with it, but like what is that and how do you get to it? Like for anyone who hasn't been using that or has that as a part of the regular workflow or wants to look into that, can you give us like a quick overview of what that is, how it works, why it might be useful?
So Search Console is Google's way of communicating with webmasters, and it's massive. There's so much stuff in there. I think we have like a 6-post series on Yoast.com on what is all in Google's Search Console, which we keep updating because they keep changing things. But there is all sorts of information in there, and if you never looked at it, you really should. It goes from information about your XML sitemaps and your indexation to crawl errors that Google has encountered on your site, to reports about all the structured data it has found on your site, to reports about duplicate titles and descriptions, to reports about page speed and whether your site is slow or fast or average. And I can go on and on and on. There is a gigantic pile of information in Google Search Console. And to be honest, if you're maintaining websites for your customers, you need to look at that fairly regularly.
Yeah, and I think it's gone by a couple of different names over time. I think Webmaster Tools might have been like one of the early incarnations of this, but
it's been renamed, and I don't know why. Google is good at a lot of things. They're pretty bad at naming their tools and their brand. Because I mean, we've just put out a course today on structured data, and Google has tools around that, and they're called the Google Structured Data Highlighter and Google Structured Data Testing Tool, and once you try and pronounce things like that in regular sentences, it really becomes a problem. But yeah, Google Search Console really is the hub of a lot of these things, and it is something that you should basically have all your clients in. And that you should look at their sites in, or if it's your own site that you're taking care of, you should look at your own site there and try and fix as many things as you can if there are issues that are being highlighted by it. We actually integrate with it in Yoast SEO quite well as well, so we grab all the errors from Google Search Console and we import them into Yoast SEO to show them to you in your WordPress backend.
Yeah, and it's a really eye-opening tool. So if anyone out there has not played with it, open up a new tab and start clicking around. There's some great stuff in there. Well, let's keep moving though. So Robots.txt.
Yes, this is probably one of the most powerful tools ever and one of the least understood. Robots.txt allows you to block Google from and other search engines from entering pages on your site. You can have individual pages, or you can have like entire series of pages by using wildcards. There's a couple of things that you need to know about Robots.txt. And it has a very strict syntax. If you break it, the search engines will just ignore it. It's also the first page that a search engine will visit on your site. So it's not uncommon for big sites that are crawled a lot to get about 200 to 400 hits on their Robots.txt every day. Google caches it for a while once it grabs it, but it will regularly visit it and check like, okay, have you changed it? And it only tells a search engine which URLs on a site it's allowed to crawl or index. To make it slightly annoying, if you block a URL in Robots.txt, that does not mean that it will never show up in the search results. If enough people link to it, even when Google cannot crawl it, it will still show it in the search results. If you do not want it shown in the search results, you need to allow Google to crawl it, so unblock it in your Robots.txt and put a no index robots meta tag on the page itself. This is the sort of stuff that even drives experienced SEOs crazy, and you won't be the first that does this wrong, but be sure to try this. This is actually one of the things where Google Search Console comes in very handy, because Google Search Console has two things. It has a Robots.txt testing tool, which you can use to test all of the syntax that you put in there. And it has a crawl as Googlebot tool, or fetch as Google, which allows you to see what Google sees when it crawls one of the pages on your site. So this is once again one of those places where Google Search Console is invaluable. So let me show you what you should not do. If you do this, then you're blocking your entire site from being indexed. This happens more than you think. The amounts of times people have offered me money to help their huge SEO problem, and the only thing I had to do was remove that slash, is insane. I usually don't charge them. But you should do something
I love
like
the usually there.
Well, if they've been very obnoxious, I get very obnoxious too. Yeah. So doing this would allow every user agent, so every bot, it would allow it to go everywhere. The funny thing is that allow is actually not in the original Robots.txt spec. So there are some spiders out there that don't know what allow means. But if there's nothing else in your Robots.txt, they'll just ignore this line. And that means that they'll assume that they can spider everything. Now, let me make it slightly harder. And this is where Drew actually said this morning that that he thought I had it wrong. So, Drew, what do you think this does?
Well, all right. I love the live demo. All user agents are not allowed. Google is allowed everywhere. Bing is everywhere, but not for Bing.
Yeah. Well, you've actually got it right. But most people don't get this, because this is the most stupid thing about Robots.txt. All user agents, except for the ones that are specified more specific below it, which is the stupidest syntax ever. And this goes wrong a lot. But this means that Googlebot is basically allowed everywhere, and BingBot is allowed everywhere except on that single page. So you can do a lot of fun stuff with this. Now the question is, would you ever do this? Well, I do this a lot. Why do I do this a lot? Well, because there are some bots out there that really like to crawl sites a lot without actually giving you value. If you're in Europe, like I am, and you're, for instance, doing SEO for a large news site, Bing will crawl a large news site very, very often. Bing has a market share of less than 0.5% in Europe. So being in Bing has hardly any value. And if they crawl your site at the rate of like 100 to 200,000 pages a day, it has a very real cost. So we sometimes just block Bing. There is definitely, if you look at your crawl logs for your site, or just the visitor logs for your site, you'll definitely see that there are probably a couple of players that are indexing your site a lot that don't ever send you any traffic or have no value to you. Don't hesitate in blocking them. It really can save you a lot of resources on your server.
Now, without maligning anyone too particularly, are there any free? So you mentioned Bing, like at least in your market, not a lot of value. Do you see any other frequent candidates for consideration in they're spinning a lot of server cycles, but not really bringing you any actual traffic? Are there some common names here?
It really depends on your market, but Bing would be one in Europe. Yandex would be one in English markets. Yandex is the biggest search engine in Russia, and it actually drives quite a bit of traffic out of both Russia and Turkey. And if those are markets that you care about, well, then don't block them. But if those aren't markets that you do anything for, then blocking them is not such a bad idea usually. So there's, but you should really look at your crawl logs, because this really differs per site and per geo. But if you look at your crawl logs and you see like, hey, there's a couple of user agents that come by a lot, and they usually specify who they are pretty nicely. Then you can just look at those and, hey, what would happen if I block this? Would that be bad? And sometimes, I know for The Guardian at some point we thought about blocking Bingbot because we were getting so little traffic from them, and they were literally spidering us at the rate of almost 1 million pages a day. And that's a rate where you're basically running one web server to keep them happy. So the cost of being in an index is sometimes very high. Now, there's a couple of things that you can do to slow down spidering, and people will do things like crawl delay in the Robots.txt. What you have to realize is that most of those directives are not supported by large search engines. So you should really just stick to user agent disallow and allow, and don't do anything else.
Yeah, so actually I've got 2 questions related to that. So one is there a practical, like, is there a good reason to say like this, or what's a common reason to say like this particular page I do not want the robots in here? That's the first question. And a second one is maybe just a little bit larger, which is the robots.txt specification is it's not like a W3C standard. It came out of I think a mailing list in the 90s or something like that. So where do you go to read up more about or is there a good resource out there for like, hey, it's almost like user agent support. Like if you're using advanced CSS, you look at, is this supported in IE6 or whatever. Yeah. Is there a good chart like that you would recommend to folks?
Well, we have one on our site on our ultimate guide to Robots.txt. There's a couple of other ones. The problem is this stuff changes regularly. The question is whether you should use it that much. So to your first question, if you don't want a particular page in the index, I would no index that page, and I would not use Robots.txt.
Okay.
Robots.txt is mostly useful when you want to do large sections of your site and you want to clean up one in smaller increments. So when I use Robots.txt is when I come into a site and that site has, say, 4 or 5 million pages, and I can see that particular sections of that site are very bad, I just block those sections outright from the beginning and start looking at, okay, so if I block all of that, what am I left with? What's the good stuff here? Which stuff is getting traffic? So I try to optimize by first cutting out like the real big stuff. I think Robots.txt should be used very lightly, and probably not as much as most people do use it. And if you want to really keep stuff out of the search results, do not put it in your Robots.txt, because that's not a guarantee that it won't be in the search results. You should give it a no index, either through a robots meta tag or through a robots tag HTTP header, which is even more cumbersome but can be very useful if you want to block entire sections of your site. Should you use this a lot? Probably not. Should you use this to block user agents that you don't really want on your site at all? Yes. Does that answer?
Right. Sorry, say again.
Sorry, did that answer your question?
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah, let's go. And actually, I'm just realizing that we probably have to pick up the pace a little bit to stay on time here. So
I'm going to be faster. So why would
and
you
I'll stop interrupting.
No, that's fine. So why should you use Robots.txt? Well, why I use it is because of the crawl budget. So if there's like 4 million pages on the site, or even if there's 400,000 pages on the site, I can block 200,000 of them, so that Google will spend its time on the other half. And that's sometimes that's something you have to worry about. But it doesn't remove a page from the search results, and because it doesn't remove a page from the search results, and Google can get to it, links pointing to that page that is robots.txt out have no value. If you no index a page, no index follow it, Google can still follow the links on the page that it is not allowed to show in its index. But that also means that the links to that page still have value for the rest of your site. So that's why you should use Robots.txt. There's of course a couple of alternatives. There's robots meta tags, and there's the slightly lesser known but very powerful xrobots tag HTTP header, which allows you to do everything that you can do with a robots meta tag in an HTTP header, which allows you to do all that stuff for instance, PDF files as well. Let me see if there's an example. Oh yeah, so I have an example from Joost Suggest. Let me go through that real quickly. If you go to joost.com/suggest, that's a very simple tool that scrapes Google Suggest. And we had Google, in all its wisdom, tries to, when it sees the search box, it'll throw random words at that sometimes. So we had the very funny case where we were scraping Google Suggest and Google was throwing in words into that search box on our site. So basically Google was scraping itself. So we had the entire Yoast Suggest page showing up in Google like a couple 100,000 times. So we had to block that. There was really no better way of blocking it out. So that's one of the cases where you really have to use Robots.txt. As I said, there's a testing tool in Google Search Console for Robots.txt that you should really look at. As I also just talked about, this relates to crawl budget, which leads into our next topic quite well. So I'm just going to take it there, Drew, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Because one of the things that why crawl budget is, as a term, is becoming so important is because of JavaScript. So for a long time, SEO recommendations have centered about having plain text versions of your site whenever possible, and to avoid dynamically generated content in Ajax and JavaScript, etc. Now, Google has become a lot better at actually rendering JavaScript. But there's a couple of things that I really wanted to highlight in today's webinar, because you're all developers and you might want to pick this up. So Google historically only grabbed the HTML from your page. Now, these days, they actually don't do just that. They render your page entirely. What you need to realize is that Google is basically rendering your page and then grabbing the DOM from that rendered page and seeing what's in there. So it's grabbing the content from your rendered page, and it tries to see, like, okay, what could a normal user see in his viewport, in his or her viewport? So even stuff that's hidden on tabs will not be used as much by Google in ranking. They will use it, but they'll try and reduce it a bit. What's very important here is that they stop rendering after approximately 5 seconds. So what you need to make sure of is that all the content that you want in that index is on that page within 5 seconds of the time to first byte. So it's getting the first byte, and 5 seconds after that is stopping rendering. So if it doesn't have the stuff at that point that you need it to see, it will not work. This is again where Google Search Console comes in really handy, where you can do fetch as Google, and you can compare left and right what Google sees and what a normal user would see in that tool. And if those are different, then you have a problem. That doesn't guarantee that it's always going to work, so you should test that. But if stuff renders fast enough, then you can get away with quite a lot of JavaScript. There's a couple of other things to note. Angular, even though it's been built by Google, is not as well supported as React, which has been built by Facebook mostly. Google is a lot better at actually indexing React than at indexing Angular, which is stupid, but it's true. It's also because, well, the Facebook team actually focuses on that stuff and the Google team does not. Yeah, well, as I said, when in doubt, use Google Search Console to fetch and render and see if it works. But also make sure that you test this stuff and that you test whether subpages that you link from your JavaScript are actually being indexed by Google. That's something you'll have to just figure out for yourself, because that changes depending on what your JavaScript looks like. Is that quick enough, Drew? Because
that is awesome. Keep rolling.
And then I'm going to HTML elements. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about with regards to HTML elements. There is this tendency of platforms to not have canonical done well. So WordPress doesn't have canonical links for every URL that you can open in the WordPress site. Drupal doesn't have that either. Not having canonical is not necessarily bad. Having the wrong canonical is very painful. Having the wrong canonical basically is like having a redirect in place, except you don't see it. So Google pretty much treats a canonical from page 1 to page 2 as sort of a 301 redirect from page 1 to page 2, as long as those pages are relatively the same. If they're wildly different, it might just ignore it. But if it ignores it too much on your site, it might choose to ignore canonical entirely on your site, which means that stuff like parameters that you use for social sharing, etc., might suddenly start showing up in your search results, and your entire tracking program might be broken. So read up on canonical a bit. It's basically the way of telling Google, this is the version of this URL that I want in the index, and all other versions you should ignore.
And how do you specify that? Like, just real briefly, for those folks who might not, for whom canonical might be a new word or a new term?
Okay, so you specify that by link rel equals canonical in the head section of a page. And so it's in the metadata of a site, so a normal user will never see it. And you put in there the cleanest version of the URL. WordPress does this by default on single pages. If you have Yoast SEO, you'll have canonicals everywhere. But in almost no other cases will you ever get a canonical on all pages.
Thank you.
This helps you prevent duplicate content mostly, so it helps Google to distinguish between the version that you shared on Twitter and the version that you shared on Facebook. If they have different UTM tags or whatever, Google will actually get that wrong at times. Now, slightly related to that is hreflang. Hreflang is a method that Google has introduced to help you specify in which languages you have specific pieces of content. It's by far the worst spec Google has ever created. I hate it with like a very, very deep kind of hate. We could probably do a webinar as long as this one on just this topic. But if you have a multilingual website, it probably is something that you should read up on and just know that it exists. It's hreflang, Hreflang. Google that and then look at the spec and see and go like, oh God, they can't. They have to be kidding me. But it's a good way of telling Google that you actually have content in multiple languages. I'm going to be quick. If you have questions on it, and this, ask me in a few minutes. The last thing that I really wanted to make sure that we mention is structured data. Google is placing more and more and more importance on putting structured data on your site. Having they mostly promote JSON-LD, which is a method of putting data on your site in a way that you can separate design and data. And in that structured data, they want you to make obvious to them stuff like ratings that you have on your site, the author of articles, the products that you're selling, whether that product is in stock, what the color of the product is. For books, it might want to have the description and the title, etc. There's tons and tons of types of structured data. Google is really focusing on that a lot. We actually released a course today that on this topic, but you should really try and read up on structured data and figure out like, okay, which types of structured data are relevant to my site and should I work on.
And that's an awesome, so this has been, I think, maybe around for a long time, or people have been talking about structured data for a long time, but it seems like it's finally arriving. Where would you recommend people go to read? Like what are the, like, we're talking HTML tags here, right? This is...
Yeah, so you'd probably start on either Google's developer docs, or on Yoast.com, we have some articles around it. There's a lot of different things where you can find a lot of info about structured data, and you have to search for the specific ones. You can also start on the hub of all of this as far as Google is concerned. That's schema.org. That's probably also one of the most reprehensible sites you'll ever see in your life.
That's a great tip, though. That's, yeah, awesome. All right, and I'm just going to blaze right through the last little bit here, which is just like how this all plays together with Pantheon. Obviously, it's a Pantheon webinar. Curious thing, why are we talking about SEO? Aren't we just providing this infrastructure? And it turns out that, as Joost mentioned, things like speed to render is really important. Pantheon is just a beautifully optimized platform for SEO and other things that just all come from sort of like almost. I was going to say almost sort of ancillary benefits from just doing, building a platform the way you want it to be built, but that was the intent from the beginning. So we put Varnish in front of every single site, which is just a very fast reverse proxy cache. We've got great uptime, performance, PHP 7, as of actually this morning. PHP 7 is now the default for all of your Pantheon sites. And if you spin up, one right now, it's PHP 7. If you have a site on Pantheon and you are interested in upgrading to PHP 7, that's been an option for quite a while. But if you go to your site dashboards today, you'll see an upstream update saying, "Hey, PHP 7's out. You want to, apply this and then put it out to your testing environment and make sure it works." And again, like you will see, by and large, we've certainly seen, by and large, PHP 7 is just a great net performance gain for everybody out there. We've got great security, a dev test live workflow, and more. And if anyone out there doesn't have a Pantheon account, they're free. Give it a shot. Our intent is to build the best tools possible for people making websites for others. And our bet is that you'll like us so much that you'll want to go ahead and use us for real. So, but try us out for free. And with that, I want to actually move to questions and hand this back to Atusa, because we don't have as much time as I was hoping for questions, so I got a lot of people out there. So take us away, Atusa.
I've got some time.
We're going to go probably, I can give us an extra 5 or 10 minutes. So we'll run through some questions. First one being, we're using Yoast to manage all of our standard sitemaps, but would also like to use a sitemap to handle our hreflang tags. Is that possible with Yoast?
No, unfortunately not yet, mostly because of how annoying the spec is. I'm actually talking at the moment to Google on whether, and trying to figure out if we can change that spec ever so slightly to make it possible to do this. What you have to realize is that in hreflang, you have to link every language to every other language that you have a piece of content in. So if you have a piece of content in 10 languages, that means that you have 100 links back and forth between all those pieces of content. Now, if you do that on like 1,000-page website, that you can see how that explodes really, really fast. So it's not there. I'm hoping we can build it at some point.
Alrighty. Next question is, what is the easiest way to get structured data into Drupal 8 pages?
I would suggest using Google Tag Manager. There's a very nice article on Moz on how to use Google Tag Manager to insert JSON LD into your site. If that is slightly too hard for you, the course we've released today also talks about that. There's probably a ton more out there on how to do that. But that allows you to basically do it through Google Tag Manager or any other tag managing solution, and you wouldn't have to touch the code on your site itself, which makes this a lot easier to do without even talking to your developer.
And if you are a developer, it's just a simple matter of theming. So
yeah, absolutely. Even at that point, I would probably push out the data that you need to your data layer in a tag manager and do it in your tag manager, because separating it from your design is such a blessing in the long run. Yeah,
and that was, no one can see me, but I was air quoting just. You know, it is just a simple matter of theming. Yeah, so excellent advice.
Yeah.
Alrighty, our next question is, how do you handle dynamic CMS views / URLs in a sitemap, since those aren't explicit content types?
Yeah, they're horrible. What you have to realize is that not having all URLs in your site in your XML sitemap is not necessarily hurtful for your SEO. The XML sitemap is a point of entry for search engines to figure out the URLs on your site. So if you're linking to those view pages from your other pages, you should be fine. Then again, if you have an unending list of views on your site, you probably have an SEO issue. So you should be able to create like a list of those views and create an XML sitemap. But I know that this is sometimes harder than it seems. So don't worry if it's impossible. If you're linking to those views from other pages, you should be relatively fine.
All right, next question is, how valuable is breadcrumbing to SEO? It seems like this would fit in with the other internal link structure ideas presented.
Absolutely, yeah. So breadcrumbs are very important. In fact, there's a structured data type for breadcrumbs as well. So it ties into two of the topics today. It helps Google figure out your site structure, literally. And that is of tremendous value both to you, to Google, but also to your users. I think that every decent website these days that is larger than like 10 pages should have breadcrumbs.
Do single-page layouts perform as well as multi-page sites?
No.
Well, that answers that question.
I can talk about that for a very long time, but no, don't do that.
All right. Let's see. Our next question is, will schema editing functionality be added to Joost?
We're looking at it, but it's a lot harder than people think. One of the problems that you have is that the stuff that you want in your schema is stuff that's usually somewhere in your page, and we have to figure out what is what in some sort of automatic fashion, and that's pretty hard. So to be honest, I think that a lot of the schema features that we cannot do, and we do a lot already. So we already do like website, and we do a lot of the simple stuff. We have a post on what we do in schema. But if you want to do, like, for instance, recipes or what's another good example? ebook book markup. And I actually think that plugins that do the recipe markup for you, or that allow you to create recipes in WordPress, they should do the schema for recipes, and we should not. We should probably figure out a way to work together with those and tie our schemas together, and we're looking at how you can do that. But I don't think that we'll quickly have like a schema editor for everything, because it becomes fairly hard to work with.
Well, you're essentially having to rebuild Google at that point, and it turns out Google has spent a fair amount of engineering time and energy building it.
Yeah, I don't really have the intent of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Righty. Next question is, are there navigation layouts that improve user experience, i.e. vertical/horizontal navs?
There's no good or bad in that regard, in my opinion. It really depends on how you work it into your site, and you have to test it, because all of this is so culture dependent. Having worked on sites all across the world, if you've never looked at a Japanese site, you should just, for the fun of it, go to a couple of big Japanese sites and see that like all the UX patterns that you have in your head are completely different on Japanese sites. And then realize that while that's like the other opposite of the spectrum, there's a lot of spectrum in between there, and you just have to test all of these things. So you just can't assume that something that's been written down by a French guy who works in England also apply to your site in the US or the other way around.
Yeah, and I think that actually highlights something that I think can sometimes get lost as people are talking and thinking about SEO. And if one way I like to think about it is, so Google and Bing and any other search engine is really heavily incented to try and find the best answer for your search query. So when you type in, whatever it is that you're searching for, what Google is attempting to do is find the best content on the internet for that. And that means what they're trying to do is understand how users will react to your content. They know that they're a robot, but they're going to try and move through a site and understand, is this site, does it have a good experience? Does it have, like, can I follow the breadcrumbs? Is it structured? Like, all of this stuff. Essentially, they're trying to model human behavior and human interactions. And so that means if you focus on your users and their experience and making sure that they have an excellent path to the content that's relevant and important, you're doing a lot of the right things. And I think it's a good lens with which to think about SEO. Of course, there are a lot of very technical things that are happening too, but nobody should be built, like, if you try to aim just tightly for the current state of the SEO sort of market, I think you're going to be doing your users a disservice. Now, of course, again, like, there's things like React versus Angular and other, blah, 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 all sorts of details. But I think that overarching principle is a really good one to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And if I might add to that, it's not trying to find the best answer to your question. It's the best page on the web for that particular topic. It's trying to find the best page on the web for that particular topic for you in the country where you are in your language. And that's very important, because results differ literally by city.
All right. I'm going to sneak a few more questions in here. Drew, I have an interesting one for you. We've been getting a couple of questions around this. It says, I've heard that Google tends to prefer sites that support SSL certs. Does Pantheon support SSL certs for their personal sites?
Yes, we do. So, and we have news. So today I was able to say, happily, PHP 7 out and released as of like an hour ago. Again, sorry, we've had PHP 7 for better part of a year probably. Late last year we released it. It is now the default, which is exciting. I'm personally quite happy about that. Right now, SSL is on Pantheon. You can put it on any site. The quick way to do it for a personal plan is to use Cloudflare. We have a docs article that if you just Google up Pantheon, Cloudflare, SSL, some combination of those things, you'll see the steps. It's pretty, I've got a number of my own personal sites I've done that with. pretty simple and straightforward. If this webinar were happening, say, a little later this summer, I would give you an even shorter, more concise answer, but I can only hint at that. Your lives will soon be much, much better for that. But again, if you want to do it right now today on a personal plan, quick and easy way to do it is just drop Cloudflare in front of it. It's a good idea. But again, we'll have an even better answer very soon, and I'm pretty excited about that one too.
Awesome.
That was very diplomatically handled. Drew, thank you for that. All right, I'll sneak one or two more in here. This one says, how can I set the OG image meta in Yoast? Is it manageable from WP admin, or should I apply a custom filter?
It's manageable. You go to, if you're editing a post, you go to the advanced, to the social tab, and then you can upload and change it specifically for Facebook or for Twitter.
Alrighty.
And for anyone who didn't understand that, that's the image that you would like the social, like the Facebook share to use if you got multiple images on a page. So you don't want the logo of your site. You want some, you probably want the key image for the page. So that's what that's about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, next question is, do you get penalized for fetching via Google too much?
No. You actually have a limit in Google Search Console. I think you can do it like 500 times a month.
All right. Next question is, where are the crawl logs? Is this in Yoast?
No, I wish. But it's we can't really store them because we'd slow down your site tremendously. To find your server logs, you'd have to talk to your host. I don't know whether Pantheon allows people access to their logs actually.
Yep.
Some hosts don't. The better ones do, like Pantheon. And then there's a couple of tools out there that you can use to look at those. One I really like that's pretty cheap as well is by Screaming Frog. This is a company from the UK. They have a log file analysis tool that you can just throw those logs into, and then it'll tell you which bots came by your site and which pages on your site they spidered the most, etc., etc. It's very insightful to look at.
Ooh, awesome. Do they have a free version? Screaming Frog. That's a new one to me.
Well, they have an SEO spider that has a free version. Let me look at whether they actually have a free version of their log analysis tool. I don't really.
Well, we're looking for that. We'll take the next question.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to end it with this one, I think. It says, very excited about the hashtag links and hashtag linked feature coming in Yoast 5.0. Are those only looking at links in the body of pages and posts, or will it pick up links in the header, footer, sidebar as well?
No, content links only.
All righty.
The log file analyzer has a free version, it looks like, with where you can do like 500 log lines. That's not really a lot, or 1,000 log lines, but it gives you a good overview of what it can do. But it's also not very expensive. It's 99 pounds per year, British pounds, and those are tumbling as we speak because those.
Seem to be cheaper than your Starbucks latte. Yeah.
Well, on that uplifting political note, I would have to say that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you so much to our special guest, Joost. It's absolutely been a pleasure. Thank you all also for spending your Thursday with us, your Thursday morning, afternoon, or evening. If you have any additional questions or feedback, please visit our website where you'll find a contact us page, and we'll put you in touch with the best member of our team. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, all.
Thank you.